Madam President, thank you for allowing me to offer this amendment today, and to my colleagues from Maine and Washington State, thank you both for your agreeing to work with us on this important amendment, and thank you for the way you're conducting this appropriations bill by allowing amendments to come forward and having a debate. This is one that I think will be relatively non-controversial. This is an amendment to the underlying Transportation and Housing and Urban Development Appropriations Bill. It simply says that bridges along our nation's highway system that need to be repaired ought to be prioritized. There are bridges that are classified by the Federal Highway Administration as functionally obsolete or structurally deficient, and we want to be sure that they receive priority consideration under the section of the bill that provides for bridges in critical corridors. This is a fund that's established under the appropriations bill, and in this way we're helping to ensure that that fund in question actually accomplishes its objective. We all know that the federal government's highway trust fund dollars are stretched very thin, and there frankly not enough dollars are making their way to the core infrastructure needs that we have in this country. In fact, in 2008, the fund got in trouble, and since that time it's been bailed out 4 times by the Treasury's General Fund, and a 5th bailout is now scheduled for fiscal year 2014. Clearly, the funds are very limited, and we've got to be very careful and resourceful in how we spend those funds. This appropriations bill does include, as I said earlier, a separate funding mechanism, $500 million for bridges on critical corridors along our nation's highways. I know there are some in this chamber who wonder whether that's necessary in the legislation, and I understand their argument. But if we're going to include this special fund, let's be sure that the money is used in the most efficient way possible. And that's what this amendment is all about. Let's be sure that we target the limited resources that we have in a way that addresses our nation's bridges that are outdated and often at risk. This amendment narrows the number of bridges that receive priority consideration by 75%, and does so by focusing these resources on functionally obsolete and structurally deficient bridges across the country that really need the funding. These are bridges with problems that, if left unaddressed, could be in tomorrow's headlines. And we don't have to just deal with hypotheticals here. It's happening. We've all seen recent accounts of this functionally obsolete Skagit River Bridge on Interstate 5 in Washington State that collapsed in May. And I know Senator Murray was very involved in responding to this. It was struck by a truck that exceeded the bridge's height limit. The good news is there were no direct fatalities, unbelievably. At least in this instance there weren't. The bad news is that there are a lot of bridges functionally obsolete, structurally deficient around the country. There are thousands of them. We need to be sure that, again, they're prioritized in this legislation. One of those bridges happens to be the Brent Spence Bridge in my hometown of Cincinnati, Ohio. The bridge is located at the critical intersection of I-75 and I-71, important arteries, and it's a bridge between southwest Ohio and northern Kentucky. This Brent Spence Bridge was built nearly 50 years ago, and it was designed to carry 80,000 vehicles today, 8,000 vehicles every day. As of this year, it's carrying more than double that number every day, and it's expected to exceed 200,000 vehicles per day by 2025. To facilitate the increased traffic and congestion on the bridge, the engineers actually removed the bridge's emergency shoulders. So there are no emergency shoulders on the bridge anymore, and they also had to narrow the lanes to 11 feet rather than 12 feet, which is the recommendation by the Federal Highway Administration. So this makes it hazardous for drivers. And it's also not alleviated the congestion much, because it continues to result in an average of 3.6 million hours of delay for passenger vehicles every year. So Brent Spence is one example of an endangered bridge that this amendment could help. We need to ensure that bridges like Brent Spence on our nation's highway system receive the priority funding that the Bridges and Critical Corridors section of this legislation provides. So for this reason, I would urge my colleagues to support this common sense amendment. And again, I want to thank Senator Collins and Senator Murray for allowing this amendment to be part of the process.